Today we welcome a very special guest, a repeat guest, the quickest turnaround guest for his two-peat. Welcome back, Chris Hauty.
My head is spinning. It's so good to be back here with you guys. I really love your podcast, and I'm very flattered that you're having me back.
Yeah, we're kicking off. It's a little bit of a Chris Hauty month here. We're going to be dropping before this episode our whole deep dive into Deep State. We're going to drop this one, and then I then immediately went into Savage Road, and I'm going to start reading Insurrection Day. So we're just going to cover all your works. It's kind of nice. We've been tackling these monumental 20-book series. Like, we couldn't just do all 20 Mitch Rapp books in a month. But right. It's nice. You have this nice short parcel trilogy with the novella that it makes it nice to do this.
Sure, absolutely.
And today, just for listeners who aren't aware, we are going to spoil the books. So in a few minutes here, after a brief introduction, we'll give you a spoiler warning. If you have not caught up on the newest installation, Storm Rising, we are definitely digging into the details and will be spoiling that plot here with Chris on the podcast. So in about a couple of minutes, we'll give you that spoiler warning. But first, I just want to say what an incredible blurb and concept for this book. On Amazon, the first thing that pops up is, quote, nationally best-selling author Chris Hauty leads fans into the depth of a dangerous white supremacy conspiracy that threatens to tear the country apart in this propulsive new thriller. That is a propulsive topic right there that you jump into.
Yeah, especially considering the past couple of years. So I'd like to say that I have a crystal ball, but unfortunately, that is not the case. It was a unique experience writing the book, conceiving it just prior to the pandemic, and then really writing it over the course of 2020, which I think is going to go down, at least in the most recent history, let's say the last 150 years, is some of the craziest events of a year. So it wasn't so much the book copying what was going on in the world as the world was kind of turning my highly speculative novel into the subject reality. Matter of op-ed pages in the Washington Post and the Guardian and New York Times. So yes, it is topical.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because, obviously, this comes off the heel of Insurrection Day and sort of, blending, I guess, continue on with that narrative. And I don't know if you've had the chance to listen to the New York Times podcast called Day X, but that's about, like the German nationalists. So I listened to that a couple months back, maybe in November. And so I was just getting, vibes of, obviously that, in Germany, they're going through this as well. And you obviously touched that in the novel that not only in America, but they have, allies in other countries, that they have this whole plan. So you mentioned that you conceived of this idea before the pandemic. When did you sort of have, I guess, both from Deeper State to Savage Road, did you have that all mapped out before you started this 3-book trilogy?
No, not at all. I have nothing mapped out. I'm about to deliver book 4, and I have no idea what book 5 is going to be, though I've just recently started having little inklings of an idea. I know I've heard Jack Carr say will have the next 3 books planned in his head, and that's one dissimilarity between us, besides him being a former Navy SEAL and me being a former Hollywood screenwriter. But no, I come up with the ideas. As I'm finishing up one book, I start to think about an area or a overall threat that I might want to focus on. And in this case, well, let me back up just a hair. As you know, I think I spoke to this before. What my books, at least so far, I can't guarantee that I'm in book 20. If there is a book 20, I'll be doing the same thing. But so far, and I still continue to be interested in the threats that we present to ourselves as Americans, and less about the Islamic terrorist who's going to bring down Air Force One, any of the other kind of other potential bad guys. So I'm looking at American institutions and powerful Americans and corruption, whether in the private sector or the government, that pose a threat to our way of life. And those are air quotes for your listening audience. So with that mandate in mind, when I finished Savage Road and I was thinking about what next to write, I can't remember exactly what prompted me to search. It might have been an article that just crossed my Twitter feed or something like that. But there was discussion of a problem in the U.S. military with white supremacy and white nationalist ideology, and it wasn't really a big problem. And I have friends who are in the military, and my dad was in the military, and it's not a prevalent problem, and it isn't today. But I don't think it requires too many people, active service people, to have those beliefs to potentially create some massive problems. And so that's, when I saw that article, I thought, well, that's definitely fits within the Haley Chill mandate of the things that I'm interested in. I hadn't really done much examining of the U.S. military in the first two and a half books. So I started to dig into it a little bit more and found, a handful of articles. Again, this is in January 2020, and I did not find that much stuff. But like I said, I work in the speculative political thriller realm. I take things, suggestions of ideas or hints of conspiracies like the deep state, and solidify them and amplify them and take them to some slightly illogical extremes. And so, I built out a story with only those, handful of articles that I'd found. And they were, legitimate. They were like military publications. The Pentagon had organized an investigation of the amount of that kind of ideology within the active service members, and just kind of ran with it. And then as I progressed through the writing of the book, very early on, the pandemic happened, and that certainly, the pandemic brings out all the best in people all over the world. I mean, generally everyone runs around tearing their hair out and trying to beat the other guy over the head. So that brought a lot of the worst elements out of the woodwork, not only in the U.S. but all over the world. And then, I think this is all this stuff is tied together. Then George Floyd happened, and the powder keg was primed, and couple link that with the pandemic, with George Floyd and the protest and the riots, the uprisings, whatever you want to call them, then, now everyone is ready to be locked up in the asylum, right? And then we get to the election campaign, presidential election campaign 2020, everyone's screaming at each other. And again, the worst kinds of inclinations are encouraged. And, I'm starting to not recognize the country that I grew up in. And it was, instead, it was more, resembling more my highly speculative thriller novel.
Right.
So very peculiar, guys. So I think that answers your question. I think you were asking. Yeah.
Yes. Before we get into like some plot details, I know me and Mike had a couple questions. What the first was, so this idea of, Haley Chill, your character you created. I think first of all, I wasn't on the interview, unfortunately. I think I was sick. I don't know, probably COVID.
I think it was a kid thing.
Or yeah, now I have 4. I have another one since then. So, but
it was definitely a kid thing.
With Chris, that's a safe bet.
Sorry. This character, I feel like this time around, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that we get a new side of Haley Chill. I think we go a little bit more internal. Was that something that you wanted to do, that you were trying to focus on this time around?
Well, I'd like to say that it was all entirely premeditated, but it was bound to happen because the book, unlike the first 2 books, the quest, the journey, it is all instigated by her search for the truth about how her father arrived at the startling situation that we find him in at the end of book 2, Savage Road. So that's one part of it. I mean, it's going to be more personal. It's going to be more interior and more emotional just by virtue of, what foot she's starting out on. It just so happens that quest for the truth about her husband, her father, ends up dovetailing with this massive conspiracy. The other reason why that happens is because that's the beauty of writing these slightly serialized, but thriller series, because you stick with the same character, and the longer you stick with a character, the more you're going to learn about her or him. And unlike some franchise characters, namely James Bond, who never seems to age a day, I'm having Haley age in real time to the book series, and I keep a careful chronology of the timeline of those books, so that she started out in Deep State at 25, and by the time we hit Storm Rising, I can't remember, either late 27, early 28. So, she's growing, things are happening to her apart from the job or a part of the job. And, she just gets deeper, but it is really gratifying. I just, before we started, I got a call from my girlfriend who's listening to Storm on audiobook. And she said exactly that, she, girlfriends will always say nice things about your work, right? But when your mother's no longer around, but she really meant it. That's the thing that she pulled out, was how much, I seem to be getting deeper into Haley's character and personality and her relationship with people and other women and stuff. So yeah, that's all good. That's good stuff.
This is a great point to hit the pause button. We want to give a spoiler warning, because you're dancing around a couple of key moments in Haley's life and relationships. And I really, you did the Hauty. You did it again. You threw a twist at us, actually a few twists that just get the whole Thrillerverse talking. So spoiler warning right here. If you haven't picked up Storm Rising, came out May 3rd. I don't know what you're waiting for. Dig into it, because I'm about to drop a bomb, and I got to hear from you.
I think sometimes people say spoiler warning, and sometimes I hear it and I go, yeah, what is it like? But these are fairly seismic, and it's quite fun to experience them in the raw, so to speak.
You could almost say it's like Sixth Sense in a sense, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, those are fun. Those are super fun movies when they get you like that.
Well, you did that to me. I'm like, okay, do we go with the father's suicide, which actually turns out to be murder? Or so we believe. Do we go with April?
Well, first, before that, you realize, I mean, that's in book 2. It's a massive, like, triple twist, because that's spread out over 2 books, because he's supposed to have been killed 10 years earlier, and
friendly fire,
and instead she's been talking through the door or over the phone with her father and search for her father, which I thought, to be able to film that scene would be so much fun, where she's at his house and he won't open the door to her because he knows that she's going to nail him. And, Yeah, I mean, it was so much fun writing that scene, and then we presume it's a suicide, and then learn in book 3 the truth behind it and redeem Tommy Chill in a major way.
Thinking about your process, as you were saying, you're not much of a plotter who knows the entire book. How much
I know
do you
that
plan
stuff.
out the twist? You know the
Yeah,
twist?
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I take that back. I mean, obviously, Deep State, I knew that ending before I even started practically.
Mhm.
I think, come to think of it, I think I came up with that idea that midway through the process of writing, that Tommy Chill was, and I can't remember who's the name of the fellow soldier whose identity he took. I think that one actually came to me fairly late in the game, and I realized I could fix that and affect it by changing very little. It all just kind of like neatly folded, like folding clothes into a suitcase. So that was very good. And then with Storm Rising, obviously, I knew we're in the grayed out period, right? Like people who have read the book, right?
Oh yeah, we're deep into it.
When did I always knew that April, I knew bringing her back, because in my mind, when I wrote the ending of Savage Road, that she would be dead, though I don't talk about it in Savage Road. So maybe I plan more maybe I'm not giving myself enough credit. Maybe I am thinking this stuff out because it makes sense. It all fits.
Let's talk about the April one, because Chris and I were texting back and forth reading this of, wait, so she survived the car accident. And we thought it was really bad with Savage Road. Mm-hmm. And then she's sitting in the hotel room. And I'm like, if she's there, why is she not helping Haley?
The accident, she didn't die from the injuries. She died from infection.
The complication, right? The bacterial.
Right. So she definitely, God, I haven't looked at Savage Road in probably 2 years, but is there a scene in Savage Road at the end where she goes to visit her in the hospital? I think there is, isn't there?
There is, but I feel like you never know, is it a
you never know.
recovery?
I leave it open-ended.
Right.
And then of course I revisit it in the epilogue of book 3. And that was another, amazing scene to write. And that intimacy that April expressed to her at the end, that was totally in the spirit of when I was writing it. And it just kind of, you kind of start getting into a scene, and that's what I mean about, like, as you write these things, it's only in writing them that you really kind of start to get deeper and deeper into the character. And so I had no idea that April was going to express that kind of affection for Haley until I was like writing the scene. And then it all just made sense, all that how they were competing with one another, and, that relationship.
That ending. Thought, it's a perfect arc from the broken fingers at the table in Publi's training. It's I love how we've gotten their friendship to, they love one another in a deep friendship.
Yeah.
And I just love how you tied a bow on that.
Yeah, the book 3, Storm Rising, it's such an odd experience putting a book like that, putting any book out in the world. You just don't know. And you don't know if it's going to hit the buttons. You're pressing the buttons. You just don't know if they're going to make the right sounds and the right chords. And I was very hesitant about Storm because of a couple things, because of the white supremacy in the military, and I've met and made friends with several fellow authors, who are ex-military, and I certainly don't, I don't mean to offend them. I don't mean to offend the military service branches. And I just didn't know if folks would take it the wrong way. But I did I made a very conscious decision to have that an American service person being the one who comes and essentially is the cavalry riding over the hill when Haley, is cradling her
Right.
swaddling nuke baby. And, I think the gal says something like, whatever, I can't remember her name, Private Wanda Smith, U.S. Army, and that was, I really wanted to drive that point home, that the people who saved the day are U.S. military personnel, and not the deeper state, or not some, whatever.
You pull that off. What else sticks with me from that is how the soldiers who were actually on the convoys moving the troops into place were under the guise that they were going to Eastern Europe, and that they were actually going to fight for a cause they believed in. And I loved how you balanced the soldiers on the front lines were being used.
What does that remind you of more recently?
Exactly.
The first wave in Ukraine.
In Ukraine, the Russian soldiers are like, we don't even know where we are.
Right.
And it's so weird. I mean, it's so weird that echo came up in real life. I mean, it's very much what, the same idea. I mean, I knew in conceiving the thing, and aware of the sensitivities and aware of what the ideas that I wanted to communicate, and my respect and admiration for people in the military, whether rank private or, brass hats. And so, I made a creative decision to, the only lower ranked personnel who seem to be involved in this conspiracy are intentionally, AWOL deserters. They're not really kind of in any way respectable soldiers. And then we quickly start rising through the ranks and get to officer.
And there really was a congressman behind the whole thing, which we as the Mitrap Pod, we can get behind, the politicians being the big bad, pulling the strings.
Yeah. I named that guy after one of my very good friends. So.
Oh, that's funny. Is he happy, or was he upset that you made him the bad guy? I cleared
it with him first. I said, hey, man, I want to put you in my book. And
I think I'd rather be a villain. I think most people would probably want to be the villain.
Yeah, I think so. His wife is reading the book now. She's been introduced to him, but she hasn't gotten to really just how dastardly he is with the gardener's daughter. So I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But anyway, I was going to say that by and large, and it's still early days, but whether really diehard book bloggers or super fans, or even just kind of like the first group of casual readers who are reviewing the book in whatever way, I've heard several times that they feel like they think Storm is the best book, for all the reasons that we've kind of been discussing. I think, the action, of course, is unrelenting, but I think more crucially, the emotionalism in the book, there's definitely a lot more emotionalism, and how much more we dig into Haley's character.
I don't know. It's hard. I really like this book, but it's hard to pass Deep State. That one was so good.
Yeah. Well, so what was so great about that book was the ability to write Haley as an intern, but of course that has to go out the window, and that could have been a potential pitfall of the series, because for almost the entirety of that book we think she's an intern. So will the charm and intrigue and familiarity of Haley Chill exist in future books when we just have to present out of the gate that she's an operative for the deeper state?
I think that one also lasts, though, for your style coming on so strong and being refreshing to thriller readers. I mean, whether it was what we dubbed doing the Hauty, the flash forwards, or the twist at the end. I mean, these quintessential things, I think, are going to change the Thrillerverse. I'm waiting to see if either of those two moves get picked up by another author.
I'll love
the flash forward
to see that.
In reference to like the flash forwards, is there ever a point where what was his name? The firefighter,
Sam McGovern.
Sam.
Thank you.
We get the flash forward for him, right? And we know that he was never going to come back into her life.
Yeah.
You're only in book 3. Is there ever a thought where like, oh shit, what if I wanted to bring him back? I mean, do you feel like you can bring him back, or
Oh no!
he's
I mean,
done?
I locked him out of that. I mean,
Yeah,
those are the rules of
that,
the universe I created. So no,
that's a big move.
I got a little bit of shit from I think it was my agent about that, and the early reader. But I really I really like his character a lot. But
Yeah.
I think at least at this stage of Haley's life, in that book, she's 25, 26. It just felt too early,
Right.
maybe I'm like a dad, who wants to, but I really love the deputy in Storm. I mean,
Yes.
he was
Yeah, and then you kill
so
him.
great,
Well,
and-
no, I don't think so.
What?
Deputy Gibbs. I was
He's dead,
trying to
right?
figure out, is it
Oh.
clear that he's dead? I don't think so, Chris. I know he
I'll
took
have
the
to go
bullet to
back
the vest.
like
because I like that guy.
I like him. Yeah. I was
think
trying to think if he's going to be around.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. So listeners, you might want to close your ears to that one so you're surprised in the future. But yeah, it could be. I really dig him. I thought he was such a great character. Sam McGovern was a good guy, but I think Gibbs has a little more edge to him. Maybe it's just being, kind of growing up in West Texas and amid the grit and drug runners. But
He was more Haley Speed, I feel like.
yeah, in a way. But I've always conceived of her as being alone, and that's
Right,
why
sure.
I wanted
She's a
to.
loner.
That's why I wanted to create April Wu as someone who I could, put her anywhere. If Haley, anywhere in the world, Haley can be on a rocket ship to the moon and she'll look over there and there's April Wu cracking wise. That was another reason why I was really stoked to, go ghost on her, because people really love that dynamic between those two. And I didn't want it to become like Haley and April saving the world. It has to be, that more Jack Reacher-y kind of Haley alone deal.
I was going to say that Haley screams like a Jack Reacher-esque. It's
I mean, I noticed other authors, they really build out their universe with characters, recurrent characters. Sometimes those recurrent characters take center stage, further down the line, but that's fine. But I think what I'm doing is I'm always going for more, kind of, I don't want to write soap opera. Sure. I want to write big ideas with each book. And I think it just needs Haley's, kind of outsized, bigger than life personality to fit in there, and less about like, okay, well, in this installment of the Haley Chill, thriller series, Sam McGovern, finds gold at the bottom of a burning building. And yeah.
It also allows you to, if you do get tired, or, I guess fans aren't receptive of a character, or, you're done with a character, it allows you to just boom, you can give someone closure to this character, and then you can move on from him, bring in someone else without having to give him like, a crazy death falling out of a burning building. You can just say I thought that paragraph that you wrote of his flash forward was very touching, and I thought it fit perfectly. But as I'm reading it, I was like, oh wow, like we're never meeting him again. That's it.
But he still thinks of her. He still thinks of her.
I did ruffle some feathers with that one.
That's funny.
Well, it was an interesting take also that came up shortly after, I believe, we had learned about the pregnancy. And I do want to get into that with you.
Right.
When that nugget was first dropped, whoa, my mind was racing of Haley as a mom. How would she deal with it? How would this work with Andrew Wilde and Publius? And I loved throughout the book how you kept revisiting that. It was another way we got to know Haley on a deeper level. Mm-hmm. And I think we saw her grow in some ways through that process.
Yeah, well, she made that decision. I mean, when she's first confronted with the truth of it, with the reality of it, She's like, hell no. I mean, I can't be a mom.
Right.
I'm a deeper state operative. And then the growth was, she's going to be constantly dealing with this of like wanting to be a person outside of her role as a deeper state operative. And so she made that decision at the end that, fuck, I'll try and figure out how to, be both. That Goldilocks, situational, I can be a mom and I can have a career too. It's a dilemma as old as, women's suffrage.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, we see where that ends up. You can't be an MMA fighter. You can't chase down the bad guys and save the world and expect everything to be in perfect health. But at least we got to see her decision making through that process. And I was really glad where she came out in the end.
I think you're glad that she decided what she did. Yeah. I mean, it was really the only way. I want everyone to get behind my books. I don't want to piss off 53% of the country with my creative decisions.
Only 47%.
Or whichever side you're on.
Yeah.
But it's still a sizable chunk. But I thought it was just the perfect choice to make because she doesn't take anything lightly. She's not a casual thinker, and she's hardcore in her thinking. And ultimately making that choice is a hard choice, and then the author gods delivered a slightly different fate. But I haven't read enough. You guys probably have read 1,000 more thriller books than I have, but I just can't believe that anyone has written a espionage or political thriller in which the protagonist is dealing with a pregnancy while trying to save the world. And so that was an early idea that I had. I just thought, like, she's a woman of a certain age. She's pretty promiscuous. She has a boyfriend or whatever, why not? And it was another thing that I had some anxiety about. I didn't finish my original thought about pursuing this notion of, white supremacists in the military was, one that I was hesitant to pursue. And also, I mean, look what's going on right now as we speak with the Supreme Court and, people, raising a ruckus outside the homes of Supreme Court justices. This is you can't get a more red button issue than this one. And so
you hit them all in this book.
I really.
Really.
I think I told Mike when we were talking about Insurrection Day that book 4, I'm avoiding all red buttons. There's no.
You
red
did.
buttons.
That's why I was confused reading Storm Rising.
That's after having finished. When I was writing it, you're full of gusto.
It doesn't seem too bad.
Yeah, but always the same thing. For as long as I've been a screenwriter, when you finish the project and before you've started getting reactions, that's when the insecurities set in. And so I it's still, like I said, it's early days. I have not gotten the really pissed off 1-star review yet, but I'm expecting it because those are some pretty, some people are just going to be really, I might lose people because she even considered getting an abortion.
That's a bold move too. Yeah.
So, but that's life. I don't just write random shit just, to pass time in airport concourse. I mean, I got it because I won't read those books. But if I heard that book described that Mike, read the little synopsis therefore, I would jump all over that.
It's the depth that sets thrillers apart, because Chris and I on this podcast have always said, are these books going to be just beach reads, romance novels for military, CIA, espionage type people? Are they going to be throwaway junk, or will they broach literature? Will they approach the status of art And I think by you not shying away from things, you having Haley consider that and actually go to a clinic, I think you're showing real life in not a superficial way that a lot of thrillers could do. But what takes the Mitch Rapps to the Mitch Rapp level, or Brad Thor to the Brad Thor level, is they take something and they get at the depth of it. And for Brad Thor, that's geopolitics. For you, I feel like it's Haley, her against the world. And if you don't do that, the book, I don't think it holds up. And I think you, by doing that with current events, with what Haley's going through, with abortion, with a secessionist movement. I mean, I want to ask you that. You were basically planning a secessionist movement. How do you even begin to document who the players are and how they're operating and what the plan is?
You know, when I was working on the research of the book, that was in December 2019, January 2020, and I had gotten approval from the U.S. Army to go tour Bliss. Naturally, I didn't tell them too much about the storyline of the book, but they were very nice folks, as most people are. I mean, 99% of the folks in anyone I've ever talked to in the military, all these former military guys that I've met through writing the books, whether they're established authors like Jack Carr or early ones, new ones, wannabe ones, to a man and woman, they're all just wonderful people. But, I wanted to try and make it as credible as possible. And I thought my idea of seizing the Permian Basin oil fields and doing some research about how much that is responsible for the world's, not just ours, but the world's oil production. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's number one. That seems interesting to me and plausible, if someone could do that. It's big, but, what I wanted to do was try and get as much detail behind the actual mechanics of a military seizure of something that big. And so I reached out to a couple academic types at University of Texas, El Paso, because I figured they would be really good. They're so close. They're all, and there were military experts on their faculty. But, so I wrote very nice emails and just explained, I thought I had some legitimacy. I just wasn't, some Yahoo writing, from Venice, California out of the blue. It was, someone published by a major publisher and, very respectful and laid out just kind of like, I'm curious to hear how a possible occupation of the Permian Basin by the U.S. military, how that might be affected, what kind of equipment would be used, the numbers, blah, blah, blah. And I got back nothing.
Really?
And whenever I ask these questions, I never get anything back. Whether I'm asking someone, very nice person at the CIA or NSA about, for Savage Road, they couldn't tell me anything. They couldn't tell me, I was like, how about like, who are the people who man the security stations at the gate? Sorry, I can't tell you that. That's not,
Gee.
So, one of the beauties of not being one of those former, NSA guys or former U.S. Marshal. I did speak to a U.S. Marshal for book 4 because there's a lot of USMS stuff in that book, and I got to sort of the most basic kind of ideas. But when I asked things like, well, how many deputies would be on a protection detail for a Supreme Court justice under threat? And he's like, I can't tell you that. So I can make it up with impunity, essentially. Right. I mean, you just use your noggin a little bit and common sense and embellish a little bit here and there and hope for the best. Because you know what? They can't even come out and say, well, you're wrong because here's the real truth, because they can't say that stuff. So what interests me the most is the character and a surprising plot that keeps you on your toes, and not an overwhelming fire hose of detail and gear. So, I thought the way that I choreographed that it all came together. It's just crazy good how this stuff comes together. You have a certain notion, and then you go, okay, how am I gonna affect this in a credible way and still be fun and not boring, and usually I think, knock wood, it happens.
Yeah, and I guess talking about characters, one of the main characters of this book is Texas, and so we were in Washington D.C. mainly for the first 2.5 books. I'm a DC guy,
Yeah,
just like Mike, but I like going to new places. And so I don't know, you said you mentioned you started your research for Fort Bliss. Is there any other reason why you picked Texas? Is this an area that you really connected with, or just geographically makes sense?
I was born in Texas, for one.
Okay.
That's not really the reason why I chose it. I definitely wanted to get out of DC and not have her always be a DC character, because those images and the feel of DC is so familiar. I think in Deep State I did a pretty good job of kind of getting at it from different angles that we hadn't seen before. I got several comments about how I had described the kind of rabbit warren aspect of the White House that people hadn't really seen before. In the deli, I think Mike and I talked about the deli on whatever street that is.
And the Key Bridge.
Yeah, and the Key Bridge. Yeah. And Georgetown.
But it's just kind of like finding new stages. And because I knew this book was going to be so dark and heavy and emotional, I wanted a physical atmosphere that reflected that. And I just think those wide open spaces and oil derricks and grit and limitless horizons and thunderheads and all that stuff, just kind of is catnip for a story like the one I came up with. And I had always, I think early on in conceiving of the book, the structure comes from the movie Taken. Do you see it? It's like the escalating, Liam Neeson's climbing the ladder of bad guys to get to find his daughter. And each bad guy, it's ascending order of badness and
it's
hierarchy.
Like a video game. Yeah.
Yeah. And like a video game. And each one delivers a clue, and you have to come up with new ways that they deliver a clue. And so that, coupled with the idea, when I originally conceived it as as sort of like Haley Chill's Alice Through the Looking Glass, just kind of like going into a different universe almost, and that things almost become luridly surreal, like the lake on fire and and the fighting. That's very it's very Apocalypse Now. What was the source book for that? The original book,
Conrad, Into the Heart of Darkness.
Conrad. It was Heart of Darkness. Yeah, it was definitely a Heart of Darkness vibe that I was going for, and I hope I got that. I think I did.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And you even, speaking of the expansiveness and the open landscapes, you give a nod to C.J. Box. It definitely seemed some inspiration there.
Yeah, I think Gibbs talks about Box. Yeah.
Definitely. Now that you bring up both Taken and going through the criminals and the clues, it's also kind of a detective story.
Mm-hmm.
And with the codex in the background of the secret code.
Right.
Oh, man. I you mentioned it in the beginning. I wasn't sure how Haley was going to use or come back to that. And by the end, I thought that was brilliant to use the what was that? The Texas Declaration?
Yeah. I can't remember what year it was, 1832 or 42 or something like that. But
it was like only a couple of years after they actually joined the Union. Yeah.
One of their first secessions.
Texas is always seceding. It's you had to figure out which one, but that was a major one that where they really did kind of pull away. And it's been a while since I researched that whole thing. I can't remember how they were pulled back. I think it was the end of the Civil War that kind of put the kibosh on that whole movement. So if the South had won the Civil War, I think Texas would have been not part of the Confederacy, but its own country. Much to the delight of Alex Jones, I guess.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if the bad guys here were successful, the next book could have had, the free state of Texas versus the nanny state of California duking it out. Could have had a battle of the first to secede.
I don't want to go that speculative. I don't, there are probably lots of books like that that sort of do the Civil War of America, the Second Civil War of America. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it a little closer, pulled into reality.
Yeah, and you
All right,
really
so-
knock that out of the park, keeping it fiction, but also every single scene is, ooh, I could see how we got there, and
Mhm.
the writing could be on the wall of how we can get there.
Mhm.
I guess you can't tell us too much, but I couldn't help but thinking of that one line at the beginning where Publius wants to send her to London.
To London, yeah.
Is that where we're going next, or are we staying local?
No, believe it or not, she's going to Hawaii
Oh, okay.
in book 4. And, it seems I wanted to send her someplace that seemed really unlikely. She seems like the least likely person to want to go to Hawaii. And she doesn't want to go to Hawaii. She hates the idea of Hawaii. She's never been there, obviously, and considers her only awareness of it is from, bad TV shows and advertisements for cruise lines and stuff like that. And it's really completely contrary to her aesthetic as a West Virginia girl. But she goes there on assignment. And what I can tell you about the story, why Hawaii? It's because the 4th book involves the Supreme Court, and not specifically the court, but she goes there to be a part of the protection detail of a Supreme Court justice who has a home there and is staying there over the Christmas holiday. And there's a threat, a very real threat against one or more Supreme Court justices that she needs to thwart. This one, the 4th book, like I said, I was somewhat depleted and exhausted by the emotionalism and the red buttons of book 3. So what I wanted to do, my mandate for book 4 was to write just a real pure thriller. So nice. Yeah, it's I've had a few people, my earliest readers, read it, and they all said, like, wow, this one really is a page turner, a real thriller.
I did have one more question about Publius. We get this, interaction between her and Andrew Wilde, where he seems to be, that he has a wire on Andrew Wilde, sorry, and he gives her the orders that she can continue, but actually what he's saying is that she can't continue. Is there a rift within Publius? Is someone in the deeper state, like working for the deeper state? Like, are we supposed to? Am I reading too much into this, or?
I mean, that I haven't done a lot with Andrew Wilde. I describe him a little more fully in book 4, but not much. The possibility of a bad element within the deeper state is certainly, an arrow in the quiver that I, can choose to shoot eventually. But, right now, I still really like the idea of, kind of an adult fairy tale, like
right.
Santa Claus and Easter Bunny for adults who are worried about the country, and that, like I am, and that there, the possibility that the Publius could exist and be out there with no skin in the game except for their desire to see things, good, that the country do good and not benefit one side or the other. I don't want to fuck with that too early. That's a definite possibility. But right now, it's really, she's, in terms of the reluctance on Andrew Wilde's part to put her into play, I just want to create that kind of abrasive relationship between them, because quite frankly, they're both fairly abrasive characters.
Right.
And, she's no pushover. He's kind of hardcore. I haven't really done much, but that is probably more of a storyline that I'll pursue in the not too distant future with the series of really, having Wilde and Haley on the stage at the same time. And he probably gets in a jam, is my guess. And she's got to save him, and he's probably done something that she thinks is a betrayal. I mean, that gets into the more soap opera kind of storylines, but I think readers and fans would really love that kind of thing. So
yeah, but I like this idea of Publius being like, I don't know, the A-Team or the Avengers, like
yeah.
But I guess they had the Civil War.
Shield,
so,
Shield gets infiltrated.
Yeah, so there's tropes for everything.
There's a lot of runway here.
Sure, definitely.
To play with. So we'll see.
I did love the glimpse into the president and former Supreme Court justice at the shooting range. That was a nice lighthearted view into the inner sanctum of Publius.
Yeah, and you recognize that former president, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And it wasn't this book, but the one before, you had a quip about doing planks to keep you healthy.
Yes.
And so I think I have an idea of the Supreme Court justice as well.
Yeah, I was in Deep State. That's very clearly, echoed. The former Supreme Court justice in Storm isn't so clearly, it's not so clearly based on someone, but the former president is. And I gave it to another author whose name I won't divulge, but he was like, "How dare you? That's disrespectful," because I have that little, the little where he makes up a word. I can't remember which word it is that he makes up. And I said, dude, I am being like completely affectionate towards this character. I'm not, it wasn't meant, and it doesn't come off as any kind of ridicule. It's like, lighten up. So I didn't change a word, obviously.
Oh, that's good.
Hey, he doubles down on Haley making the shot, so you got to like the guy.
Oh yeah, I love that scene. That was such a fun scene. It reminded me of all these scenes that I've forgotten in the book, because my head is completely immersed in book 4. But I love that scene where he bets on her. Yeah.
Well, this has been great having you. And one more question. The last time we talked to you, you were reading McCloskey's Damascus Station. So first, how'd you like it? And 2, what's on the end table right now? What are you reading?
Well, let me with David's book. Yeah, I mean that book kind of humbles me with its expertise and knowledge. I thought it was really a great book, completely different from the kind of book I'm writing, which is the books that I'm writing, which makes it obviously easy to not compare myself to David as a writer, but as a reader, I thought it was tremendous. And for a first book, it's like kind of amazing. I just finished Winslow's new book, City on Fire.
Nice.
Which I loved. I'm a big Winslow fan, and I just thought, I love the way that guy, he writes the kind of book I love to read. It's just the characters and the dynamics. The prose is clean, and you just race through it. But doesn't mean that it's kind of like typewriting. It's real writing, but it's just super easy to consume that book. And then I think I'll read what's next is Petrie's The Runaway. I've had that on my bedstand for a while. Want to get to that.
Very good.
Yeah, Don Winslow said this is his last trilogy, and then he's getting out. So
and I just read somewhere on Twitter, I follow him on Twitter, he said that the 2 next books are already written.
Yeah, they're already written. Yeah. Let's do a podcast on him. Yeah.
You did an event with him on your book tour. Was that right?
Oh, I wish I had done an event with Don. I went to the LA Book Festival because he was speaking. I wanted to see him, and I wanted to see Jonathan Franzen because I'm a big fan of Franzen. Do you know who that is?
Got you. My wife read a few of his. Yeah,
literary fiction guy. But anyway, Winslow was doing a big speech, big talk, and he's going to be interviewed by Michael Mann, the director, right? And tremendous director, but had not really prepared to do an interview. He literally did not prepare. He had read the book, and Mann was not used to being the one asking the questions.
Mm.
So Winslow was so stand-up. I mean, he's very good. Don Winslow is a very good speaker, very articulate and engaging, funny, all those things. Tells a great story, and so the interview of Winslow ended up boiling down to Don Winslow asking Michael Mann, like, tell us more about that scene between Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in the cafe in Heat. And I'm like, I'm pulling what little hair I have out of my head because I love that movie, but I wanted to hear about Winslow. And so anyway, I had a copy of my book. This was just a couple weeks ago. It was about 4 days before Storm Rising was going to drop, and so I had a copy of the book, and I messaged David Brown, my world famous publicist, and I said, "Do you think it's cheesy if I give Don Winslow a copy of my book when I take his book to be signed by him after his talk?" And David gave his blessing. He said, "No, it's fine. I think it'll be fine." So I got in line, and I had a copy of his book and a copy of Storm Rising, and finally, I got up to him, and he stands when at these book signings, he stands up for some reason. And his publicist is on the other side of the table, sort of getting the book ready for signing, turning it to the right page and turning the flap in. And I give her both books, and she starts to pull out my book, and she said, "You want Don to sign both books?" I go, "Oh no, that's my book. I wanted to give him that book." And she is kind of perplexed, and Don Winslow is kind of perplexed, and they're both kind of like, "Who is this weirdo?" And then I said, he had talked about in his talk, he had talked about Meg Gardner, and so to like halfway legitimize myself, I said, "Oh yeah, I wrote this. I was a screenwriter for 30 years, and books like yours inspired me to turn into writing novels, and I just wanted to give you my third book." And I said, "Meg Gardner was kind enough to blurb it." And he was like, "Oh," and then he was kind of like, "All right, this guy's not a freak." And then the publicist turned it to the title page, and she said, "Oh, Emily Bessler Books. Oh," and so like,
I know David Brown. That's all you had to say.
Yeah. So anyway, he was very kind, and but I don't know. I don't know if my book ended up like at the bottom of his publicist's book bag or not. But Don, if you're watching the podcast, listening to podcasts, please read the book.
Speaking of the physical book, though, all you had to do was show him the cover, and that would catch your eye. Your covers have been knockouts.
Yeah, I love that cover. I really do. I lobbied for a cover like that and was very pleased with what the good folks at Atria came up with.
Really came out great. Yeah, I mean, Deep State, I love the two tones of it, the dark nature, but this one is bright. I don't know if that's an explosion or just a sunrise or sunset. It's the lake on fire. So many elements from the story are captured here.
Do you see the Capitol building and the letter I there? And the right.
Oh,
didn't even catch that, Mike.
Oh, and we on the Thriller podcast, we like to pick up on these details, but no,
that's a little Easter egg for you boys.
Oh, baby, that brings it to a whole nother level.
It's a great cover. The Atria is going to reissue all the books instead of so far both Deep State and Savage Road were reissued came out as mass market paperbacks. So going forward, Storm Rising is going to come out as a trade paper. But before that, they're going to reissue Deep State and Savage Road also as trade paperbacks, bigger, better paper, better cover. And I'm all but positive that they will sort of redo all the jackets to kind of conform with because I also like the cover of Insurrection Day, which obviously is just an ebook, but the cover is much more in line with the cover for Storm Rising.
Yeah, usually they redesign the whole line when they do that, and they usually look like they're a set, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping, that we can unify, because Deep State was so different from Savage Road, and
it was.
hopefully it can all start to kind of look all the same.
I'm mesmerized by this Capitol building
man.
here. That's a twist, like getting to the last, 10% of one of your books is the twist.
Yeah. Well, I like to bring a little extra to the podcast. I know you guys are experts and all, but I like to get you with a little.
We're masquerading as experts. That's for sure. You're the expert.
We do a good job then pretending. Well, one last thing I have to say to you is another big thank you. Last time we had you on, I don't know if you recall, but I told you how Deep State and Savage Road got my dad through his COVID recovery. Well, he sent me a copy of Storm Rising, had it on pre-order. He got one for himself, and he's saving it until next week or two when he's recovering from his knee replacement. So again, you are helping him through some dark times, and it is much appreciated. You giving these stories, not just to the world, but also to my family. So thanks for what you do.
Honestly, Mike, I'd love to send him a signed and inscribed copy of the book, and he can gift. I'm glad that he purchased the book and pre-ordered and all that stuff. So have him do whatever he wants. He can read it or whatever. I'll pop a signed and inscribed copy because he sounds like a great dude, and I like him to have a signed copy.
Again,
That's
too
awesome.
generous. Thank you.
And just remind me of your dad's name, and I'd love
sure
to
thing.
do that.
Yeah, I'll shoot it out to you. Sure thing.
Awesome.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love to hear what he thinks.
Cool.
I'm really flattered by your guys' enthusiasm. I really, really appreciate it, and super excited about Chris Hauty month. So keep me posted.
4-part series.
Yeah.
I know I wasn't on the pod when you were talking about Savage Road, or I guess you were talking about Insurrection Day, right, Mike?
Yeah, Insurrection Day. Yeah.
And we haven't you really talked about Deep State, but when I read Deep State, and I guess it's because Mike didn't tell me, I didn't know you were a screenwriter until halfway through the book when Mike told me you were a screenwriter. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it clicks. And I like started to pick up, I'm getting the vibe of like, he's imbibing his background into his writing style. It definitely leads to just this propulsiveness. Like I said, I started Storm Rising yesterday, I don't know, noon. And then I listened to it in less than, and I know it took me 24 hours, which is not that long. I consider I listened to it on 2 times speed, but I have 4 kids. So for me, that was a feat. And I even shocked Mike that I had finished it before him. So
I didn't think you'd be done for the interview. And unless, you don't put a book down, you must not have put your ear pod down.
No, I had my AirPod in all day doing work. Just I could. Nice. I needed to know what was happening. So yeah.
Did you like the reader, the narrator for?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to ask you about that.
It changed, right?
It changed.
Yeah, she's new from. We had someone else for the first 2 books.
Yeah, so you had someone who was like I remember her from Homeland, and I liked her, and I guess so. She did an accent for Haley, whereas the new one does not put that accent on there, and I don't know. I like both, but I really she was really engaging. I don't recall her name right now.
Well, my girlfriend, it's Lisa Flanagan, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes.
My girlfriend consumes audiobooks and lots of them. And when I was, offered, I think Marin Ireland was either had gotten too expensive or unavailable for Storm. They sent me 5 or 6 or maybe 8 different ideas, and I went through them with my girlfriend, and she really thought that Lisa did, her voice, listening to samples of her other books was the gal to go with. And now Lauren is halfway through the book, and she just, totally loves the new reader. So it seems like it's a good selection.
Yeah, I thought she was great. I really loved that first reader too.
Cool. Yeah, so did I. They're all good.
Right.
If they're reading my stuff, I gotta love them.
There were a few books where George Goodell didn't do a Mitch Rapp, so it's up and down. Right.
All right, guys, well, it's past your bedtime, so
right.
Better let you go. Anytime.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris.
If let's go for the 3-peat. I'm all.
Let's do
it. The hat trick. I'm ready. Cool.
Yeah,
well, I really appreciate your support. Truly do. All right, guys. All right.
Good night.
Good night.